Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. It's a beautiful day here in Calgary, Alberta, and wherever you're located or wherever you're viewing from, welcome. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to tune in, to hopefully upskill yourself and to learn something from Martin. Martin's got a tremendous wealth of experience. Him and I have worked together in Calgary here numerous years ago when he was the director of soccer at Calgary West, and has since progressed back to his native homeland of the Czech Republic, and is the head of the coach education and methodology department for the Czech FA. Tons of experience in lots of different environments, and really someone who I respect both his curiosity, his authenticity, and his genuine care for making the game better and for investing in the game to make it better. He's someone who has always been a pleasure to communicate with, is a top level professional in my opinion, and someone that I respect greatly. So I'm really happy to have Martin on today. If you've got questions, if you've got a burning need for information, please shoot it into the chat or the Q&A, or raise your hand as well. Martin's been gracious enough to say, hey, if anyone wants to interrupt my presentation, that's totally fine. Let's interact. I know it's difficult in an online environment, but let's try and make it as inclusive and interactive as possible. So that's enough about what's going on today. Of course, there will be a recording available, so if you need to dip out at any moment, that's totally fine. Martin's been very gracious in saying, yes, please record it, please share it. So we'll make sure to send out a recording to everyone who's attended as well. So no further ado, you're not here to listen to me yammer on. So Martin, please take it away.
Fantastic. First of all, hello everyone. It's really nice to meet you here, even though it's in online space. But I wanted to say it's great to be back in Canada and Calgary, when I really had a great time of my life, and I truly hope I will return one back, maybe as a visitor, maybe to live there again. Who knows? But Jordan, very much appreciate the fantastic intro. You kind of like put a pressure on me right now to not mess it up, but I'll try my best. Excuse my rusty English. It's been almost 4 years since I came back to Czech Republic, so I hope that everything will be, well delivered, well said. And if there is going to be any question, as Jordan said, even about the explanation of some of the slides, please do not hesitate. Give us a signal. Just turn on your mic and let's talk about the things to make sure that you get the best out of it. So just a quick intro about the topic. Since I actually took on this new challenge of being in the role of head of coach education department for the Czech Football Association, me and my team, we really sat down and we said, we need to look at where we are as a Czech Republic in terms of player and coach development and where we would like to be in the future and how we can get there. We, strive towards creating a context about what are the needs of our environment? What are we missing there? And I will try to create the content for you as well to explain, what were the base, the foundation and strong foundation, I have to say, in terms of how we were approaching coach and player development from the history, but at the same time, how we identify the areas and spaces of how we can bring new approaches, pedagogical frameworks, and methodologies to, let's say, uplift the way how we work and develop players and coaches, and hopefully catch up the world, which is slowly kind of like running away from us. So I will play a video, and I apologize, the video is commented in Czech language, so it's not really about what's been said in the video, but the video is just quickly showing the history of Czech football combined with the current picture of the current national team players as well. But I'd like you to watch and see if maybe some of you who are following soccer, I'll try to go back to soccer, not football, sorry. So for those of you who are following soccer worldwide, you might actually recognize some of the Czech players who used to play for the national team. So let's give it a try and let's look. Hopefully the sound and the video will go smooth. If not, Jordan, please give me a heads up.
Už 120 let hrdě reprezentujeme tuto zemi. Se lvem na dresu jdeme do boje s kýmkoliv. Ať je doba jakákoliv. Hrdě bojujeme. Hrdě fandíme. Hrdě vítězíme. Hrdě se zapisujeme do dějin. A když padneme, hrdě znovu vstaneme. Reprezentovat pro nás znamená dostat ze sebe to nejlepší. Na hřišti i tribunách. Už 120 let. Hrdí hráči. Hrdí fanoušci. Hrdí lvy.
So at least you guys had a chance to learn a little bit of Czech language. But the purpose of this video is to show kind of like the baseline for us in terms of doing let's say like a little research, brief research about the golden generation of Czech football players and Czech football or Czech soccer in general, and the current situation and the current generation of our soccer players, and look at, you know, what happened there. Because if you look at the history of Czech soccer, you can see the FIFA ranking as it went from the formation of Czech Republic after we've been split from Czechoslovakia, when we had the best era of our football in between the years of 99 all the way to 2006, where we were ranked number 2 in the entire world. And if you look at the video, and some of you are actually following soccer for a longer time, I'm pretty sure that you have recognized some very memorable faces and players and even moments of the game our Czech players were able to create. For example, Pavel Nedvěd, Tomáš Rosický, we had Karel Poborský, players who played for Juventus Turin, Manchester United. They have won several awards. Pavel Nedvěd won the Ballon d'Or. The memorable moment of Antonín Panenka and his, you know, way of delivering the penalty kick, which has been called after him for a long time. And, you know, I was surprised that even in Canada, the kids knew what Panenka PK is. So when you look at the history and then you go to the right side of this picture, you can see how we actually starting to make the decline of how we actually develop our players. We can say it's at the international level, but the international level is providing us a good way how we can actually make the measurement. And we all know that everything what happens at the top professional soccer level starts at the grassroots level. Everything is connected, and some players will make it all the way up to the professional level. Some of them will not. But if we can provide the right environment for, you know, fulfilling their potential and their dreams and desire, then no matter what level they actually go to, we can help them on the way and we can keep them in the game longer. And that's what was the aim for us. So we started to make questions. Okay, what are the differences between the golden generation, where we were, you know, powerhouse of soccer in the world, and what happened since then to the current situation in Czech football or Czech soccer, and what are we missing here? You know, so this is a quote from a book, and I got this book by accident, to be honest with you. I think I was just having a birthday, and my wife just was going home from her work, and she stopped by a bookstore because she knows that I love to read a lot, and especially about content related to football and soccer. So she saw this older book and she said, okay, I haven't seen this book in your possession before, so I thought I'm gonna buy it. And I'm so happy that she did, because this quote is just explaining a lot. So this book was really about, you know, in 2009, if I come back to the previous slide, you can see that in 2009, right here, it was pretty much, you know, the start of the decline of the Czech soccer at the international level. And this book with its authors were actually talking about, you know, how they evaluated the golden generation and why they thought the golden generation was as it was, and, you know, kind of like put a picture towards where things might actually starting to, slow down or get more or less effective, if you will. And you can see, if you just read the quote, that one of the very popular Czech soccer coaches, he explained that he thinks it was due to the natural talent of our people in general within our social cultural content who had cells for collective sports. It was very obvious that our players were really good throughout the improvisation, like such as intelligence, like game intelligence, creativity. And he said that he cannot otherwise explain it because, in terms of strength and conditioning, like speed, endurance, strength, our players were not really better than players from the other countries. If you look at players like Roberto Carlos, Clarence Seedorf, for those who remember these top international players, like when you look at their physique, it was like bodybuilders these days, unbelievable. And when you compare them to Milan Baros or Pavel Nedved, it was nothing like that. But they're able to cope with that and actually surpass them in terms of some, solving some game situations by actually their creativity and game intelligence. So we look at some of the research which has been done within these areas and compared, what was our strengths back in the days in the golden generation and what are the weaknesses, presumably, and how we're standing in these areas these days. And I'm just sharing with you and research done about the high distance ranking in season 2022 and 23. And I'm just picking one factor they're researching, and which was about the benchmarks of the high intensity distance running. So when the players are actually running above 20 kilometers per hour. And they found out that the Czech league is actually the most demanding one, throughout all of these leagues throughout the world in terms of, the demands of the strength and conditioning. So when we look back into the quote, how actually the top coaches were evaluating the golden generation, you could have seen, well, of course, something has changed. Because on the left here, you can see that, based on the evaluation of the top coaches, and I'm very, very glad and privileged that even today I'm working closely with many of them from that generation, and they're providing us consultancy and providing us their wisdom and knowledge. And you can see that, they evaluated that the players in the golden generation, the strength was technical and tactical level of the players, high level of functional skills. So the skills were actually used very functionally within the context of the game under the pressure. They're really good in terms of game understanding, effective decision making. The strength was on the psychological level, resiliency, intrinsic motivation. So many players, spent so many hours growing up just on their own with the ball, trying to develop their skills because they had that high intrinsic motivation. Nobody needed to challenge them. Nobody needed to take them by the hand and, make them work on these things. They wanted to do it. They spent many, many, many hours playing the street football and different sports as well, growing up. On the social level, that was always something, even today, which we evaluate as, our big strength. The togetherness, the team cohesion. We always know how to fight for each other. Like the environment the teams are actually able to create within the locker room is massive. This might be the first, kind of like combination of my views of how I saw the player development in Canada and Czech Republic. When I moved to Canada, I quickly learned that most of the time, the players are not actually able to spend time together in the locker rooms. For many reasons, there can be a lot of, benefits to that environment. Of course, there can also, as everywhere else, can be even bad things happening as well. But let's talk about the positive things. And in our culture, it's extremely important piece of the player development for the social purposes, where the players have a chance to get to know each other on deeper level, make the connections, talk about football, soccer, school, and everything else. So that's probably one of the reasons why in this area we were always, considering it as our strength. And then On the physical level, the strength and conditioning level, we were able to, cope with the demands of the game at the top level, but it wasn't our strengths. But the previous slide was showing you that has changed. Our professional league is the most demanding. A lot of international players are struggling to actually, adapt to that environment, because you can have a player who is used to play, let's say, the North American style of player, or South American style of play might be better example, when it's very tactical, different pace of the game is changing. You can see a lot of the players' flair and their skills. But in Czech, if you will watch our games, now it's getting better because we have a blend of a lot of international players coming in. So it is changing slightly, but it is extremely demanding in terms of the physical level. And on the right side, you can see how we actually evaluated, the current generation of our players. So in the technical and tactical level, we are behind. Like, our coaches are evaluating the players that they're lacking the functional skills, the creativity, improvisation, game intelligence. So how do they actually read the game, how they understand the game, how they can effectively make decisions under the pressure from, the real game scenarios. On the psychological level, it's very similar. We found out that there is a lot of, like low levels of resilience and intrinsic motivation of the players. It comes with the form of life, which I'm going to talk about a little later as well, how things are changed and how that influenced the players. But probably, most likely, we haven't really adapted to the changes within the social, cultural environment and the form of life in the way how we develop coaches and players. But we remain very good in the social realm, and we actually started to be really good in terms of the strength and conditioning. Even I found out when I, took on this role, that within the coach education programs, we spent a lot of time talking about strength and conditioning development within the player environment. But we're forgetting about these two areas which are highlighted in the red. So then we really investigated, just in a nutshell, what has changed since the golden generation and what has not changed much. And I purposefully, use this phrase, what has not changed much, because I want to go into extremes and say this hasn't changed a lot. It really is about the context from area to area, from club to club. But in general, the form of life, we know that has changed tremendously. Social, cultural, economical aspect of how we live has changed a lot. The influence of technologies in a good way and in a bad way is here. We cannot deny it. It's part of our lifestyle. So we need to appraise, we need to, find a way how to make the best out of it, how to implement it into how we develop players and coaches. Lack of unstructured activities and implicit learning opportunities. These things I highlighted because I think it's extremely important to really highlight that what has happened within the environment when the golden generation of players was developing. I think I said it before, they spent tremendous amount of hours in this unstructured environment when they just played street football, street soccer, sorry, all different sorts of sports. And that was interesting and important area when they had chance to learn implicitly. So implicit learning, for those who might not know, we can just simply describe that I'm learning by doing without the need of actually thinking, why I'm doing the way I'm doing it. So it's like the quick decision making, quick intuitive decision making, which you really learn by doing it and doing it repetitively without the need of actually thinking hard about it. Explicit learning is the different thing. So it's slow learning when it's explicitly explained by either the coaches or adults or thought through by the players. And that is a big thing because it aligns with what we identify that our players currently are lacking. because that influences the area of actually technical and tactical development of the players. It influenced the decision making of the players, etc. What has changed is that we, as you in Canada, we adapted the flexible formats of the games. So we stopped playing as I was growing up. I was 80 years old and we played 11v11. It was too big for us. So we applied actually playing flexible formats and smaller formats, which are meeting the needs of the players as they're growing. But what has not changed a lot in terms of meeting, the changes, the school system, the methods of teaching, it's slowly changing, but there's still a long way to go. So the way how the content and the program within the elementary and high school and university is being delivered is pretty much the same as when I was in school. So we're not giving a lot of opportunities for the students to be creative, to learn critical thinking, to be engaged, to be interactive with the teachers. And that is actually translating to how the players are coming to the soccer environment, soccer clubs, and how they actually are used to get information and work with the information. We have lack of PE classes or after school activities. I think this is a big strength of Canada when, elementary and high schools or even universities have a high level in terms of how many, school activities you have or school sports. We don't have that. We have 245 minutes at the best per week PE classes at elementary and high school level, and it's not enough. And we're talking to the Ministry of School and Education to make sure that we explain them how we need to change this and make it more effective, just in general for the healthy lifestyle of the children. We have lack of applied research in the sport domestic specific areas and domains. The session design and delivery to meet the needs of the players, which is our job a lot. It hasn't changed much. I've been in Canada since 2010 till 2021, so almost 10 years. And I can tell you when I came back, and went on the pitch, not a lot of things has changed since when I left. So the 10 years span, you haven't really seen too much of the changes in terms of how we approach session delivery and design. Understanding of learning and skill acquisition and development and adaptation. Again, there's been so-called beliefs, cliches almost, that something which has been delivered in one way 30 years ago or 20 years ago still remain as one of the main sources for people in terms of how to understand these areas. But the research has gone way ahead and we fall behind. So we started to cooperate with universities to make sure that we catch up with the most updated versions of how actually children and people learn, how they acquire skills, how they develop skills, so we then can implement it in our coach education and player development approaches. Need of coaches for structure and control in training. Still, we can see that a lot. And we're going to talk about it more. What is benefit and actually weakness of that approach? And the player identification process, survivorship bias, role of relative age effect. We're talking about it a lot for longer time, but we just don't implement it into reality. So the actions we can see on the level of clubs are still not really representative of what is needed in terms of how we can understand this better. So I hope this makes sense so far. It's been a lot of information. So I'm just going to pause here for a second and ask if anybody has any questions about painting the picture of, how we identify the needs of our environment and in terms of player and coach development, comparing the golden generation with the current generation.
Yeah, Martin, there was a question that came through in the chat just around, and you would be excellent to speak to this, around that mindset change of those Czech coaches or maybe club leaders as well to adopting new methods, new visions for football development, and for even what you're highlighting there in terms of session design and delivery, or that understanding of learning and skill acquisition. Like, has it been a struggle to shift that mindset, or has it needed to be shifted within the clubs or within the coaches that you work with?
That's a brilliant question. Thanks for that one. Of course, it's been challenged. It still is a challenge. And, we always put that challenge on ourselves in terms of we need to make sure that when we are trying to convince people to reflect on certain methodologies or, pedagogical approaches, we need to make sure that we give them enough information and reasons to reflect on it and perhaps change and evolve. So we decided that we don't want to make it, let's say, mandatory. Like right now, you have to change and you have to do it this way, because it will go from one extreme to another extreme. And I might actually going to mention some of these examples as well when we went from one extreme to another one. So we took, slow steps when we're doing a lot of coach education programs in the smaller groups to larger groups, through online system and space, to going to the clubs, talking to the leaders, talking to the grassroots people. Coach education programs, like officially under the UEFA convention, we implemented all of this content into there, and we try to show as many examples as possible where we try these approaches and we show the results, like what it makes and why we believe it should be this way. So we know we cannot change everyone, because especially when you go to, let's say, UEFA A license, and we're trying to give you tools you can use in your environment and give you recommendations in terms of what we believe will be beneficial for the players in your environment. You always can come back to your club, and the club can be, working under different values, different approaches, different methodology. And some coaches don't even have a chance to change the way, because they have to align with what the club wants, or their head of education or head of coaches. So we're trying to really see what is the, let's say, the spectrum of what we can influence, and trying to make the best steps to influence it. But it's still work in progress, and it will take some time. Every change takes time. So I don't know if I really answered the question, but that's where we are right now.
Sounds like in that middle zone of going from one to the other almost, or trying to get some sort of shift and change to happen, if I could distill that down a little bit.
Absolutely. A lot of these approaches, I will go through them, and most of you might be actually aware of them and might know them and do them already, but I will try to explain why we want to apply these specific ones. Like a lot of them, it's a massive change for the coaches. And just imagine, you have your philosophy of how you develop players, and you've been doing it the same way for several years, 10 years, and all of a sudden somebody comes to you and challenge you. Well, what if there is a more effective way? You might have had even success with your approach, but what if they could have been even bigger success in terms of how many players you develop, how they, went far in terms of their development, how they actually fulfill their potential, and etc. So yeah, we're just trying to make sure that, it's done in the manner that we're not trying to threat anyone, and we want to make sure we give them enough information and reasons why.
Perfect. Appreciate that. There is one more question. I think you'll probably get into a little bit of that later, in terms of priorities, thoughts around the foundation phase, that golden age of learning, and how can we help players fall in love with the game and try and facilitate those unstructured activities that you're highlighting there, or maybe reintroduce some of those unstructured activities that have gone away.
Oh, that's another great question, and I will actually talk about it a little bit. So please, later on within this presentation, come back to me if I answer the question or if I can actually add more to it. Cool. So that's a great way to come back to this. So let's continue. So the question was then, we don't want to just erase everything which has been done over the years in terms of coach and player development. We need to be respectful of, our history, our culture, and all of the great work which has been done by the people in my department before me in the club or Czech soccer environment before. So we really evaluated like what is still influencing the coach and player development well nowadays, which we have been doing for a longer time, and then what can we add to it? What can we do to build from the strong foundation? And this time we really question the youth national team coaches. They really have a, let's say, a deep understanding in terms of, the player development throughout the years. And we just, talk to them about how they see what our players are having as their strengths and what they're actually lacking, and we can get better in terms of helping them to be better in these environments. And you can see a lot of things are actually matching those areas and those foundings we have from the adult senior level. So the players at the youth level, we're meeting the fitness demands, strength and conditioning wise. Like we're really good in that. We have good team cohesion, togetherness, again, the social aspect and ability to follow the game strategy. So when a team comes to a game at the international level and the coach is presenting them the way he wants to approach the next game, the players are actually able to follow the plan really well. But the problem is coming when the players are supposed to actually, take the game towards being more creative, solve the, unseen problems which the game actually provides. It's a complex, game when we cannot really predict what's going to happen. So they said that they're lacking the understanding and reading of the game, which is the reason why they're not really good in, taking the accountability of the football actions. They're lacking the effective decision making under pressure. So a lot of the players, when you're training, they're actually able to show some really good, decent skills in, let's say, isolated drills. But then when you actually are watching them, how they transfer those skills to a game situation, those skills are non-existent almost. Like they're actually struggling. It looks like they're relearning those skills again under the pressure. So we need to look at that. That's how I actually would describe again the functional skills. So the functional skills is pretty much how you transfer any type of a skill into the game context, so you can actually do it functionally. So when I'm passing the ball, I'm not just kicking the ball for no reason, but I'm asking towards certain direction with a certain purpose, certain way, with a certain weight on the ball, and etc. And doing it in the complexity of the game. And players' autonomy, communication, and leadership. Those are the areas which are actually not considered being our strengths. So we had to look at that and how can we create methodologies in terms of coach development to help the coaches to develop these things within their environment with their players. So that's our goal, to equip the coaches with the necessary tools and knowledge to meet the needs in terms of the player development. So we don't want to create, let's say, a curriculum or a blueprint that everybody will do the same thing the same way everywhere, because every context and environment in every club or every level is always somehow different. So we wanted to give them tools and give them enough reasons to not be afraid to pretty much experiment, try new things, try new approaches, work with it, and figure out yourself if you will stick with it and you see the value, or you will decide that the different approach is better. Because if you look at how you want to develop players, if you want to develop players with a certain level of creativity, we can talk about what creativity is, but just in general, you cannot put them all to fit a cookie cutter. You need to make sure that you allow them to express themselves, to be creative, to be different. And we want to do the same with the coaches. We invite them to bring new ideas, to have discussions with us, to talk about different approaches, so that we can learn from each other and have more tools to solve different problems in terms of player development. But again, it's really important for us to not just talk about things from the perspective, I think, or I feel, or I've learned it this way, or I've been doing it this way. So, we want to make sure that everything we do is evidence-based. So even for me, because some of these approaches we're going to go through now, I've learned them in Canada. I've learned them from, the best minds in the game around the world, from people who are much more competent and knowledgeable than I am and ever will be. But it was important for me that before I will be able to try to implement them in different social cultural contexts, that I really thoroughly understand them and I can apply them in the way that, it meet the needs of that environment and people within it. So we always look at that sweet spot in the middle, how we bridge the gap between the experience and reality based. So the practice with the theory. I will just play this video from Thomas Tuchel because, of course, we're talking in general how we want to, adjust our coach education and player development. But we can always talk about there's differences to the approaches at the grassroots level when they're kids, when they're youth, when they're adults, when they're at the top level. But I will always take a snips and pieces of every one of these environments and try to show you some connections in between them. So let's look at Thomas Tuchel, who is one of the top coaches. Some might disagree nowadays, but he's been at the top level for many years, still is, and he's going to be talking about how he sees the game. And that is the key for us, to really see the game in a certain way and know how we understand the game, and then we can actually teach it. So let's see.
Thomas, I read an article which said that you probably only spend about 10 minutes sometimes working on defensive skills, which I think may have been a little bit of a joke, but was that a defensive masterclass as far as you were concerned tonight?
Yeah, but I said maybe 10%, not 10 minutes, but 10%. I think that to speak about training is a very complex approach. This is in what we believe. We do very few minutes. We spend very few minutes and moments in training isolated on defense or offense. We train in complex situations because the game is complex, and we don't try to divide the situations on an artificial way. That's the first thing that I wanted to express, and I spend 90% of my time to think about solutions offensively, and if you have a good ball possession against City, maybe it's the best way to defend.
So again, what can we take from this top coach of the top level, one of the really interesting minds in the game? He's talking about how he sees the game. He sees the game as complex. So we cannot predict the game. We cannot, let's say, take the game in the pieces, because it would take, the reality of the game away from it. And that is an approach which we're trying to adopt as well, how we see the game and how we see the skill acquisition and player learning. And there's a let's say scientific area called ecological dynamics, which is talking about, the complex systems, that the game is complex and the players are complex adaptive systems. So we cannot really predict exactly, how the player will develop throughout the year, because there is always the continuation or continuing interaction between the environment and the organism, which can be the player within the environment, and they influence each other. So when we're trying to, develop a player to play soccer, we need to develop him in that environment, which is representative of the game itself. So Thomas is talking about, listen, we only train 10% of the time in isolated environment or isolated drills, because I believe that the game is complex. So I need to prepare the players to play the game effectively by training them in similar environment, in similar complex environment. And the similar complex environment, we know that is actually what the street soccer is about as well. The implicit learning, when you actually always, are challenged with your perception, your decision making, and the execution of your decision making. Continuously, you implicitly learning as well. So the underpinning area of ecological dynamics, which is talking more about how the players are developing and how we coaches can actually start talking about creating the environment, is called constraints-led approach. And the constraints-led approach is actually explaining that the coach should be put in the, let's say, role of being the architect of the learning environment. An architect in the meaning that, you as a coach, you should be aware of what are the constraints which are influencing the behavior and active actions of the players. So I'm trying to find a way how to explain it more, but if I know that, I put an environment where the players are not, able to make decisions, of course, it's going to influence them in a certain way. If I create an environment, I can influence it by just putting simple rules in place, making different sizes of the pitches, making different numbers of the players of the teams playing against each other, making actually the way how I matching the players based on where they are. Everything is influencing how the player actually learns and behaves within that environment. And what I'm actually securing is that there is the so-called perception action coupling, and that is a key for us. And I will explain more the perception action coupling, why we need it in the player development, why we need to make sure that it is being part of the majority of the time when the player is learning within the training environment. And everything we do should be goal-directed activity. So the purpose of why we're doing this way, why we're doing this drill, why we're doing this exercise, it's extremely important because it helps the players in terms of how they read the game and how they are actually able to play the game as well. So again, one layer down is so-called non-linear pedagogy approach in skill acquisition. Now we're going really deeper into how we are sharing the principles of session design, how we actually are talking to the coaches about, listen, if you follow these principles, we can make sure that you're doing a lot to ensure that those areas we're lacking in when we are talking about what we actually lacking in terms of our player development in the current situation, that we're going to be focusing on those areas and hopefully we will get better in them. So you can just simply quickly read through this, but non-linearity is talking about that we pretty much are not able to execute one football action. So let's say one football skill, passing. You will never pass the ball the same time exactly twice in your entire career. Something will be always slightly different, even if it's the length of the grass, the ball position, the position of your teammates or the opposition players. Everything is always going to be different. So we want the players to learn, multiple ways how to solve every single game situation. We don't want to teach the players just a certain amount of preferable skills how to actually solve a game situation. So, for example, I don't want a player to only know, 3, 4, 5 different ways how to go one-on-one, how to do step over, how to do so-called Cruyff turn, how to do Zidane move. We don't want just that. We want the players to actually have, their own solutions, to understand how to be the defender differently, and to make sure that they have, their own preferable movements. And those players I just mentioned, how they actually created these skills. When you think about it, they somehow developed them by themselves. So they created them. So we want our players to be able to actually create their own moves, which they can be named after. Why not? So we need to think about how we're going to do that, how we can create the representative learning design. And I've shared here something which some of you might know. There's a gentleman called or named Marco Sullivan. He's a bright mind in the area of skill acquisition and constraints-led approach. And one of the things he has developed within AIK Stockholm, which is a professional football club, in their academy, they just set up these simple principles of their session design. So every exercise should have a ball, should have an opponent or opponents, should have a direction, and should have a consequence. The consequence meaning if I lose a ball, there is something happening, because in the game, we don't want to separate the game phases from each other. We should defend already, or think about defending already when we're attacking. So then we're well positioned even when we're talking about, youth game, we want our players to learn that based on how you read the space, how you read the game, you can behave and act and react much more accordingly to the context. So here is just 4 simple principles we are, talking about with the coaches. We would like them to apply in their practice in their environment. The main one is representative learning design. So the environment they're creating within their session should be as close as possible and as representative as possible to what the player is actually experiencing within the real game. So the information representative within the training exercise should be representative of those information from the game. That's the way how we can help the players to attune to the appropriate information around them to make a better and quicker and more effective decisions in those game situations. And they can actually connect the action they're doing, the skill. So why am I doing the skill? Why am I doing it this way? So then they can react to the ever-changing environment many different ways. And that is how we are trying to help develop the game intelligence and the decision making I was talking about that we're lacking currently in terms of our players. And that is the way how we want to bring even, the street soccer to the environment within the structured environment within the clubs. And I'm not saying by any means that within the environment you see in the academy, that it means that you only just allow them play, random games and nothing else. Not at all. Not at all. We need to always work with the complexity, and we need to always put the why there, and then make sure that we create the environment based on that. And I will talk about it a little more. I will show you some examples from practice, how some of the coaches from the license I've been just delivering are thinking about these things. Then we want to ensure repetition without repetition. Again, that speaks about the multiple functional solutions to one game problem. So instead of one ideal situation, because we found out that our players, from the way how we develop them, in isolated environment, they have many different great skills. But the transition from that environment to the real game environment is suffering because they're not able to transfer these skills to the game situations. All suddenly everything is too quick for them. It's new and they don't know how to connect the dots together. To do that, the players have to be, as we call them, the architects, be able to manipulate the constraints. So they need to know how to create the environment which intentionally is going to influence the players and create the opportunities for actions we want them to develop and get better at. And the promotion of external focus of attention, again, just helping the players by specific coaching interactions, and I'm going to talk about it a little more as well in a second, to help them to navigate their attention within the game environment. So we don't want only the players to think about, hey, you passing the ball. So think about it, where you plant your left foot beside the ball, how you open your hip, how you open your right foot, how you swing your foot. We want them to also focus on, where do you pass? Why do you pass there? What is the end product of your action? Were you successful or not? Make a reflection on it. So these are all the things we're trying to implement. Just for example, let's go to videos to make it more, relative to the game itself. Just a simple question: is one skill always the same for everyone and everywhere in every moment and every time? So again, just an example from a game, and you're gonna see that what I selected is a simple skill of passing the ball. So just look at how many different variations we have here when the players are passing the ball, and what actually makes the players to choose differently in terms of the action, the execution of passing. We can talk that some actions from De Bruyne here, it might not be considered passing, but crossing. But the point is, is the pass always the same? Is the player always, executing the pass the same way? Of course, you can see that not is the right answer. There's always a different way of the execution, how he is executing the pass, what is the weight of the pass, what is the direction of the pass, and everything depends on the context, which area of the field we're occupying, what are the defenders doing, what is my goal within the game environment, the game moment, the game phase, what is the tactics. Everything is really important to actually bring to the players as soon as possible, based on their needs, of course, and the level of complexity. You cannot put your child at 8 years old and expect them to do these passes like De Bruyne. You have to always scale it down. But even the players need to learn, to have their perception and learn how to read what is happening around them as soon as possible. And I guarantee you that you will not be able to replicate all of these passes which De Bruyne is doing and replicate them in isolated drills, because you would probably spend your entire life trying to always drill every one of these executions, and you always have to put those defenders the same positioning as you see them in these little game moments. So when we're talking about representative learning design, I'm just showing you here that, of course, your, games, moments of the game, we're attacking, we're defending, or there's a transition in between. But you can see that, I've actually showed here that we don't want to separate these game moments when we're developing the players. So, for example, when we're actually separating attacking phase only without the transition to defending, there is not the consequence for the players as they're learning and growing. The players who actually lack that skill to quickly change their mindset. Hey, we lost the ball. Let's go and try to counter press and win it back. Let's react quickly. And then you can see that the players are actually, forgetting themselves. They're still attacking, but the game is already on their half. So we need to make sure that we making this being a part of the player learning. So there's always the phase before or the phase after. So we're helping them to learn the game by making more representative in the game situation. And of course, you can see here around that we as a FA, we're just talking about just basic principles of the play, because we cannot tell every team and every club, this is the way you go into play the game. They have their own ways, but we're trying to talk just about the let's say the simple phases of the play. And then as we developing the coaches, we're always talking about each of the phase and how to understand and what are the trends in these moments, etc. Then when we're talking about the real environment, for example, 11-a-side game, you as a coach or you as a club, you should have certain way how you see the game, how you set up the principles of play, and then everything should be applied and reflected in your session design. For example, you have static zones. So we were using 3 zones in attacking phase and defensive phase. You might use 4 zones. You might use 5 zones. Whatever you decided to do. The same with the channels. You can have 3 channels. You can have 6 channels. It is really up to you. But for us, it's important to use it to create the representative reference in terms of how we design the training session. So we always start from the picture of the whole. Here you can see I've actually used a language which should be very known for some of you because we've been talking about this in Canada, soccer coach education as well. That, when you look at this game phase, we can say, all right, we can see that the red team is attacking and trying to actually break through the medium block set up by the opposition team. And within this picture of this game situation, you can scale it down to what is your focus. So we have the game phase breaking through the medium block of the opposition team. You can go to the cooperation of the whole team. What is the whole team doing in this moment, in this phase of the play? And that can be my focus for the session. Or you can scale it down to focus on the space of interaction. What are the players closest to the ball carrier? What are they doing? How do they interact to solve this game situation? That can be my focus on the session, coming from the representative situation of the game. Or you can scale it down and focus and zoom in all the way to the individual player. in the zone of intervention. So what is the player doing in this moment? You know, how can he solve this moment effectively, the best way? But if you actually, you know, create your session design this way, and even talk about what zone or channel is this action happening, and you replicate it in your session environment, then, you know, it's easier for the players to transfer how they solve this game situation to the real game situation later on the weekend. That's how we're thinking about this, of course. Again, little pause, Jordan, if there is any question, or if this part actually was understandable from me.
There is a question, and it's a great question that I'm going to try and not butcher here. If you were to put your coach developer, coach educator lens and maybe your hat on for a second, because you've been delivering all day on the UEFA license and then found some time and energy to be with us here tonight as well. From that kind of coach educator lens, obviously these courses now that you're delivering have gone through an evolution process where likely previously it was very technical, very tactical. This is how you solve the problems. This is how you execute a skill. You know, what has been the response, I guess, as well from the coach educators to moving to more of a blended learning approach, a more individualized learning approach, where you've highlighted that you're trying to give these coaches on the UEFA license that you're working with tools that will be applicable in their environment. And maybe some strategies that will work for them as well. You know, what are your thoughts around that, and maybe what have you seen within the Czech FA with that?
Okay, so you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific because there's been a lot of questions within the question. So
That's fair. That's fair. So in terms of moving from a very technical, tactical heavy course to that blended learning approach, what's been the response within the Czech FA from your coach educators that have had to shift maybe how they deliver the course?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Again, I cannot say we're at the end of the process, but it was really important for us to create like a new program, how we actually develop the coach educators, how we identify the potential coach educators and how we develop them, and also how we want the coach educators to develop the coaches. So we've been cooperating a lot with UEFA because there's been a lot of great minds and with experiences from all over the world to set up these strategies and steps. And it's been an interesting process because it's pretty much the same, but on, let's say, another level. When you're educating coaches and trying to convince them about, self-reflection and critical thinking about their philosophy and approaches. So then you have to really get the coach educators on the same level so they're capable of doing the same. So you really need to make sure that you're open to their views, their discussions, their philosophy, but at the same time, you need to be ready and you need to have all of the knowledge necessary to make these tough discussions and make the discussions, on a very deep level to convince them about the new ideas, new approaches. And I always believe that the best thing to start believing in something is actually apply it, try it, live it, and then, have the reflection afterwards. So we've spent a lot of time actually with the coach educators, and we're going to have to spend even more. And what we're trying to do is in the future to work closely, not just with the coach educators, but the head coaches or we didn't really, in Canada, we didn't really have a name for this position, but the lead coach of the club, like the sporting directors, if you will, those ones who are responsible for the coaches and coach education within their club environment. So we want them to be coach educators as well and go through this process of a formal license for coach educators to make sure that we connect what we're actually going through with the coaches at the UEFA licenses to a continuation development in their own environment. So we, for example, Jordan would be the head coach or sport director of Calgary United. And I am the one who is delivering CONCACAF B license. So I want to make sure that if somebody like a Joe will be actually part of the license and working in Jordan's club, that Jordan will get my feedback and evaluation of Joey. So then he can actually, connect to the learning the phase of learning where he is throughout the formal education program, and continue it within the real environment in his club. So that is something we're trying to apply as a systematic approach.
I love that, Martin, and I'm hoping that I've done that question justice. So if not, we'll have Gary come off of mute and maybe ask again. Gary shares a lot in a lot of coaches circles that I'm at or involved with, and then also online as well. And I know he's a coach educator, I think, with the FA. So just some context there as well. Martin, I think you were just about to get into this, but the notion of the spectrum, the practice spectrum, in terms of unopposed, very isolated activities compared to here's the game, right? And maybe when and where, or maybe when and why would be a better way of asking. You would use more of an isolated approach as opposed to a very random approach.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we can be here for 3 days in a row to explain everything, to be honest with you. It's an area where I've really dug deep for the past 10 plus years, to be honest with you. If I'm going to start from the end, if you will be watching me coaching and delivering sessions, I will be similar to Thomas Tuchel. You will see a maximum of 10% using the real isolated drills, unopposed, just kind of like rehearsal of certain movements or actions of the players. I believe it has its space, it has its reasons, but for us it's extremely important that every coach understands the benefits or pros and cons of every type of activity, what it actually gives to the players and what it takes away from the players. And based on the evaluation and of how we are developing the players right now, where they are in their performance, then we know that we don't need to spend more time in isolation, because we need to go more towards the functional skills. We need to be more in more complex and real environment and situations. And there are certain, I will actually come back to it, Jordan, if you don't mind, because you created a great bridge towards the next slide. And I'll try to explain it through actually this next couple of slides. So this is a spectrum which we pretty much inherited here in Czech Republic. It has been part of our methodology for many years. So we actually divide the type of activities in 6 different areas. Practice exercise type number 1, which is the unopposed drill in isolation. So the condition of the drill is not changing. It's always the same, and it's always the same execution of that drill. Then there is the same exercise type 2. So again, there is no pressure, but the way how you actually structure it can be changing a little bit. So I might not only pass to point A, but I might pass to either point A or point B. So there is that little bit difference between it. And then we have game-based exercises type 1 and type 2. And the only difference is that in the type 2, it's closer to the game as a whole, but you always take like a piece of the game, and it has certain start and it has certain end of the continuum of the exercise. And I will show you an example. And then we have, of course, small-sided and large-sided games. And this is what we are telling the coaches, that if you look at the spectrum here, then the practice exercise type 1 is right here on the scale, and the games are all the way, the large games are all the way here in terms of what it brings, what it gives, and what it takes from the player development. So we know that the drills, the unopposed drills, that they're lacking the representativeness of the learning environment. They're really good in terms of bringing a lot of repetition. We can focus on the biomechanical execution of certain movement of the players. Again, they can repeat it multiple times, but there is a lot of evidences from the research that there is a less transfer of that skill to then more complex situations. There's less variability within that solution of the player within the game context, and there is a lack of decision making, so perception action coupling. And next slide, I will show you what it actually does to the players then in later stage of their development. And on the other end, you can see that, you know, the large games, there's more tactical emphasis, more transfer to the game situations, more variability in the player learning, more decision making, perception action coupling, but there's a less repetition. So what we tell to the coaches based on our needs, use the drills, unopposed drills, when you feel like they can bring a value. So for example, in the warm-up, there's a good opportunity. I will show you example as well, you know, where you can use it. But again, doing unopposed drill can be done effectively or ineffectively, more or less. So when we're talking about unopposed drills, for us at least, it's important to try to bring the context from the game situation there. So then the players can actually see the why. Why are we doing this? Then you can have individual and positional training, especially when, you know, you have a lot of training sessions in our, let's say, national academies or professional club academies. The teams are doing a lot of individual positional training, one-on-one, and small groups with the specific coaches, and, you know, they're going through real details based on the evaluation of the players. So then it's really tailor-made. We can have fitness context, you know, somebody's after recovery from injury, so you cannot put them in the games. So you just do a repetitive drills with them to make it safe. And extra session on their own. You know, there's a lot of private academies in Canada. There's been a lot of them as well, you know, and they're focusing on the extra sessions. They're focusing on, let's say, teaching the kids, you know, what looks really nice, some of these skills, you know, and movements. And there's nothing wrong about it if it's done properly and you don't really risk injury of the players, for example, because they're doing too much. So we said, do them, but do them purposefully. Do them in the right time, in the right amount of you know, length, and focus more on these types of exercises because they are ensuring the development within the areas which we identify that we're lacking of. So that's the preferred training methods. So if I'm going to show you, just as Jordan mentioned, we have UFA license, and one of the students was trying to cope with these let's say, new approaches and methods. And I just wanted to show you this because by any means, you know, we cannot say that this is like a perfect example of a session. But I think it was really well considered by the coach in terms of how we critically thought about session design. So when you look back just quickly on this game situation and how it can be aligned with the session design by using the first three type of exercises, so the unopposed drill and then the game-based exercise. So how we actually try to show how we would work on that within this game moment and this picture of the game phase with his players. It's under 15 team, and I'm just going to put a small commentary to it so you can see that he just set up this unopposed drill when the players are in positions respective to that game situation. Okay, and it's warm-up activity, so you can see that there is not high intensity, but he's using one of those principles of repetition without repetition. So if you look closely, every action is actually executed differently. Sometimes this player passes the ball to the midfielder, sometimes he's bouncing back to the center back, sometimes he turns with the ball himself and plays straight to the wide player, the wing player ahead of him. And the way how he receives the ball, the way how they passes the ball, that's up to them. So we just encourage them, or the coach encouraged them, to always find different ways to solve this game situation, this problem, technically and tactically. So even within an unopposed drill, this is the type 2, because the conditions can change a little bit, how they actually execute this. You can say that there's a lot of principles being applied in it. But the players know why they're doing this, because they know that the goal of the session is talking about this game moment within the game phase. So the coach make the next exercise, and now think about typical rondo. When the coach just wants to play rondo, usually what happens is that coach just randomly somewhere on the pitch, when there is a space, set up a square, and then put the players there 4v2 and tell them, we're playing rondo and your goal is to have certain amount of passes and you have points for the passes. If you lose the ball, you switch with the defender. So then where is the context? What is the why? Why are we doing what we're doing? And you can see that this is a pretty similar setup to the first exercise, but the players are in position respective to that game situation. But the coach decided to put there a little bit of pressure. So now there is the perception and decision-making and action coupling going on, because now the players on the ball has to solve the problem based on where the defenders are. But it is respective, again, to the game situation. So the players can see the why even more. But of course, again, we can talk about, you know, the distances, if there's enough defenders to make, you know, the challenge appropriate, the motivation of the defenders, what happens if they win the ball, and etc. But I just wanted to show you the thought process of the coach who's going through the transformation. And then the coach decided to do the face of play exercise when he challenges the team in two different ways. So first, he's switching the game, the play from one side to another, and focuses on this situation right here, which was again highlighted at the picture. So what is actually happening in the cooperation of the players after the switch of point of attack in this area of the field? The first challenge is that there are defenders. There's more defenders in certain positions. The second challenge is that he has put defenders there without the pinnies on. And in his, let's say, explanation, he said, I want the players, some of the defenders, not have the bibs because it challenges the players on the ball to focus more or put their attention even more towards who is actually defending me. So that was his explanation, and we just, you know, talk about it. We didn't mind it. And here you can see just intervention of the coach when he stops the play, just explain a few things to the coaches to walk them through what he sees. I think the camera will just switch quickly. So just you call it like a freeze method. We call it situational coaching when the players just, you know, walking through the situation with the help of the coach. So again, the players have an opportunity within the representative session design to solve this game problem and focuses on the goal. I'm just gonna let it go to the end. So I intentionally, you know, wanted to show, let's say, the first three types of exercises on the spectrum, because I think that it's easier to coach this in a whole when you just set up like a representative environment and you just put 11 players against 11 players and you coach it through the game. That can be challenging when the coach doesn't have the level of seeing the game and understanding the game. But I think it's much more harder to be actually more effective in, let's say, the unopposed drills, to make the unopposed drills to be really helpful and effective in the player development and player learning, and the same in these type of exercises. So Jordan, I don't know if this kind of like answered the question.
I mean, I wasn't the one who asked it, to be fair, but judging by how thoroughly you've gone through it, and I love the example of, you know, still having an unopposed activity that still offers for some variability. So that opportunity for repetition without repetition based on how the balls come in, where the player is shown, what spaces they're looking to occupy, where there might be gaps. All of those pictures change constantly, even in that unopposed activity. And you can follow a logical progression from that coach in terms of moving from that to I would even call that an expanded rondo, right? Or a positional specific kind of rondo type activity. And you can see the intentionality behind that progression as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. The why is the key. The context is the key. So when we're talking about the principle of perception action coupling, I'm just going to show you a video of an interview with Arsene Wenger, one of the top minds of the game.
When you learn to play football, you learn the other way around. You learn first execution, after decision making, and perception comes in last. And I have worked with players from all over the world, from all kinds of cultures. I played one time with a team from 11 different countries, you know. So I'm confronted with many different cultures. And our problem is, once a circuit is printed in your brain, we as managers who speak to top-level people, we find it extremely difficult to change that circuit in the brain. That means, what does that mean? Basically, when you educate a young boy, you have to make sure that you do not harm the perception.
Of course, Arsen is speaking about young boy, but it's the same for young girls as well, for all children. So again, it's brilliant message for Arsen to talk about. Let's be careful about developing the players the other way around. So it's like, you know, when you're tuning on the old school radios and you have those little, you know, things you can move. That's, you know, perception, decision making, and action. Yeah, sometimes you can actually, you know, volume down perception and decision making to volume up the action to get more repetition. But you should still try to do your best to make at least a little bit of the perception and decision making being there, being involved in the process of learning for the players. And if you don't, I have an example here from the analysis of our youth national team players, where I can show you exactly what happens. I have selected defensive skill, just how you defend 1 against 1. And if you as a player are learning this skill in isolation without the perception action coupling, so I'm defending actually a cone, I'm defending a stick, I'm defending nothing, and I don't know, you know, how I can couple my movement with the movement of the opposition player, then these type of performance mistakes are happening. And it is not a coincidence that I've selected videos from under 15 all the way to under 21 national teams and the player performances with the same common thing. So again, I always try to highlight the players within the action, so hopefully you're going to be able to see them. So here, of course, already we can talk about the positioning of the player and actually, you know, starting the defensive action. But look here, how the player has been really fooled by the opposition striker by just a simple movement to the opposition direction that our defender pretty much almost fell on the ground. Here the same, how the defender is actually reacting to the striker, and it will come to this area right here. I think I haven't highlighted this player, so hopefully you can see my mouse. So watch this player, how he's defending. Again, the ability to react on the actions of the opposition player, to perceive it, decide and act, has been really limited here. This is under 16 team, the same. The defender just unable to react on the movement of the opposition player. Under 20 national team, look at the defender. Again, simple movement from the opposition player is enough for the defender to actually, you know, almost fall apart. And this is probably the worst and the best clip for this case. Under 21 national team, just a simple move from the opposition player made our defender at this top level of football to sit on his butt within the game, because there was been limited perception and action within the way how the players were actually learning these movement skills and defensive skills. So another way of thinking about this is the promotion of external focus and attention, which comes even with the perception action. So allowing the players to really, you know, see the information around them and work with them to make the best decisions and guide them is our main focus to, you know, do as a coaches. So we're trying to teach our coaches and coach educators to our coaches is what are the coaching interventions which can be aligned with different didactical styles. I don't know if you are aware of Moshton Spectrum, like what are the didactical styles, like guiding discovery, self-discovery, and etc. So how can we give these tools to coaches to be more effective in terms of how they're providing the feedback and how they're coaching the players within the training training sessions or even games? And this is actually a extremely old video back to when I was working in Nova Scotia. And I also hate to watch myself on a video, but I did it for the purpose to show you just a few examples when I was going through the transition and learn about different interventions. So for example, the players here were focusing on actually building out from the back. These are 10 years olds. And, you know, I've decided that one player is repeating similar mistake over and over again. So obviously showing signs, hey, there's probably a need for help. So the freeze method, or we call it situational coaching, when I bring the players all the way back to that situation before the action happened from the player on the ball. And first, it's important to always ask the player, hey, were you aware of actually why you decided the way you decided to solve this problem? Because we lost the ball here a few times. So what was your goal? What was your idea? And then we have a conversation with the player about, hey, would you actually solve this situation differently now when you can look around? And I'm trying to point his attention to a certain information he has missed in the decision making before. And he just suggested by himself, hey, there is a space on the other side so we can change the point of attack this way. I said, okay, show me. And as he showed, we just continued to play. So, you know, being more interactive, intentional with the players, giving them opportunity to really guide their attention and figure out what are the information he needs to gather from the game environment. And then, of course, this is another intervention which you definitely know and use. In Canada, we use this much more than we do here in Czech Republic. And that's kind of like the reciprocal style of communication. When there is a goals, there's a task, and the players are actually talking to each other, trying to solve it. Hey, what did go well and why? And what did not go so well? And what can we do to make it better? And I'm allowing the players to have a more social interaction, talk to each other, express their opinion, giving them high fives to always, you know, encourage every opinion they expressing, because that's what we need, right? Safe environment for the children to not be afraid to speak. Because in the game, even at the top level, you can see that when there's opportunity, the players have to solve the game problems. The coach has limited options to actually change the things within the game in the weekend. So can we allow the players to be able to take the accountability for their actions and how they play and solve it by themselves? So for that, there are a few things which are important for us to change, and it might actually come back to, you know, some of the things we're trying to really implement here. And it's helping the coaches to know how to create a safe space where the players are feeling safe and confident to express their opinion, to allow them to teach effective communication skills. So players should know certain basic rules of effective communication, because if they're haven't gone through that, you know, there can be some counterproductive communications happening within the social interactions. So making sure that, you know, we teach them to be respectful, mindful, but also extremely important to talk about the role of feedback. So the players are actually comfortable by getting feedback and providing feedback. And there's a certain steps we should be aware of. Now, of course, when we're growing and learning, the first feedback we're getting from parents or teachers in the school or coaches in the game. They're telling us, you know, what do they think? What should we do? And how should we do it? And then the second step is how can we help the children to actually give feedback to themselves at certain age? How can they actually evaluate themselves, and how can they actually, you know, self-reflect and give themselves feedback? And it's really important, because then you can move to actually peer-to-peer feedback. What happened to me when I came back to Czech Republic was that I took on a team. It was under 14 team. And my mistake was that I skipped these first two pretty much parts of the feedback, because I thought automatically that they went through this, that they're on a high level, so we can actually apply the peer-to-peer feedback. And we did a simple exercise after the game in the preseason phase. We sat down and I said to all of the players, hey, just give a brief feedback to the player on your right hand about his performance in the game. What did you like about him? You know, and what can you tell him to help him to, you know, work on in the future? And for a certain time, it went well. they've been able to share and talk about even their roles. Like one player said to another man, "Hey, listen, you played really well. Like you were always involved on the ball. You created so many different, opportunities to score a play." So we gave him a kind of like a role of being the brain of the team. He was a really, really good midfield player. And then we had another role which they set up being like a robot of the team, somebody who was non-stop working, running everywhere. Then we have Casimiro of the team, which is a player who always destroys the opposition players. He always kind of like stops them. He's kind of like the destroyer of the opposition actions. So it was interesting. But then at the end, we had a goalkeeper who didn't really have a good and strong performance, and he made some really like a simple mistakes in the game, which is normal. It's natural. But the problem occurred that the player who was giving him the feedback wasn't really aware of these skills and communication skills. And he told him something which wasn't really nice. It might have been real, like based on, his performance, but he didn't really put in account kind of like the impact of his words towards his teammate. And that's when I realized this is my mistake, because I skipped few steps in terms of, setting up the safe space, effective communication, and teaching them about the feedback. So we had to make few steps back to make this work much better, and we fortunately did. And of course, it's important to develop the competence of the coach, the experience and the knowledge, how to facilitate the learning environment, how to understand and apply approaches like transformational leadership. I know it's part of Canada Soccer licensing systems, so I'm not going to talk about transformational coaching and leadership much more, but the important is that we apply transformational leadership as well, because we know that it actually is helping to meet the basic psychological needs of the players, which are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And those are the areas which I showed on one of the first slides, that they are those ones we're lacking in our current generation of players. So we apply the principles of transformational leadership, which are aiming towards actually these three basic needs to fulfill them. And we already can see, when somebody's trying it, that the feedback coming from the coaches is very, very positive about it. And here's just 3 examples at the end to show you, what we're trying to apply within our environment, how we're developing players. And I think this is one of the questions which came from the coaches in the chat, like examples from the reality, from the real life. If you look at the picture here on the left, you can notice what we believe is not really helping the players' autonomy to being efficient, because the mother is actually walking by her son and actually carrying his own stuff, his own bag, doing simple stuff for him. So she's taking the opportunity for the player to learn, to learn and actually get better in autonomy. You can see on the right, the good example, the clubs allowing the young children when they're starting to play soccer to dress themselves. Some parents are not allowed to go in the locker room to actually change their kids. Hey, if the child is at the age when he can or she can try things themselves, do it. Allow them to make the mistakes. You can see he put the jersey on, reversed, but it's brilliant. We don't care. We don't mind. He tried. So then we can help him to fix that problem. And next time, guess what? There's a big chance he will do it right. But he learned. And his autonomy and competency is growing. And in the middle, that's my team, the under 14, where I came back. And some of the, things I've been doing with them is just giving them the competency to actually do game preparation. So they actually talk about, hey, this is how we go into play in different phases of the play. These are the roles for the team, the groups within the team, and the individual players. And that's how I share with them the opportunity to actually take the autonomy on themselves, the responsibility for their performance. Then they were able to actually reflect on it afterwards, set up individual tasks and goals for the future. And that was a way for me to check the understanding of the players, how they actually read the game, how they see the game. And that's, again, one of the things we have identified that our players were lacking, because they never had the opportunity. Sometimes when you actually ask the players a question, and this is a serious thing after my return to my country, When I asked 14 years old players about their opinion, what do they think? They were shocked. They're like, coach, you better tell us. I'm like, what do you mean? Or when I actually allow them to self-discover within the game, within you know, the situations I replicated even in the practice, they're shocked and they're like, well, coach, can you tell us what we have to do? And I'm like, okay, we need to talk about this. So we just had a genuine conversation about what are the pros and cons. When I tell them everything and give them the solutions, against when I create the problems and let them to find the solutions themselves, first of all, and then when needed, I can step in and help them by guiding them. So these are just few examples what we try to implement as a simple things which can make a big difference long term in how we develop the players. So connecting the dots of all the things together to make them one methodology, which hopefully will help our environment. So if I'm correct, I just hit 90-minute mark. So hopefully it wasn't too long and hopefully it makes sense. So I will allow maybe Jordan, if you want to say something or somebody has a question.
Martin, what I would say is the fact that you didn't even come up for air or water or anything during that time was unbelievable. And honestly, I don't know if I'm going to fit out my office door here. My head's so full of really, really fantastic information, some golden nuggets that I need to take away and start to think about and reflect on as well. Yeah, different class, Martin, like really, really, really good. There's a question here just in the chat. How do you encourage players and what rules do you have when they provide constructive criticism and hold their teammates accountable to either their own team or club standards, especially if they're older and they might be uncomfortable calling their teammates out? Like your example there was with the 14s. Do you come across much of that with your role now?
Yeah, of course. You know, it's always important to have certain rules in place, you know, and helping the players to learn how to effectively communicate. There should be safe measurements in place always, but you know, there can be a differences between how the players are, you know, developed. What is their background? Like, for example, this team, the under 14s, there was a player who wasn't really, you know, feeling comfortable speaking, talking in front of everyone. So I'm just gonna apply it in this case if you don't mind. So what we tried to do to work with this player was, okay, let's minimize the interactions with him to maybe just one-on-one, to give him more confidence to speak only to one teammate, to make sure he gain the confidence to share his opinion. It could have been, you know, even just me and him talking to each other. So he could have been giving just a feedback to me, and then when we were talking to like a bigger group of a players or a team, you know, I kindly intentionally set up the opportunity to say, listen, what do you think about this? And I believe that you told me a very good thing. You told me a very good thing. Would you like to share it with others? So I created an opportunity for him to know that what he's going to say is a good answer, so he can be comfortable by sharing what he told me in front of everyone to give him the confidence to share and speak. So just, you know, being a role model and trying to find a different ways and solutions to help the players is extremely important. And then find the players within your team which can be another, you know, kind of like leaders in this area, and get them, you know, to try to fulfill these tasks as well, to actually go and try to speak to others and allow the others to express their opinion, and give them time to give their opinion, and give them recognition of their opinion as well.
Yeah, and I think if I could just layer something in, there's probably a difference between helpful and hurtful. Hurtful comes from anger and an emotional state, and helpful comes from compassion and empathy. So, you know, within your team, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be helpful to each other or hurtful? So if you want to be helpful, you have to, you know, release the emotion some other way and then look to be helpful. So compassionate, empathetic, how you speak, what you're speaking about, super important there to try and layer in something as well with you, Marty.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing any other questions from anyone else in terms of the chat. a curiosity in my mind that kind of piqued as you were rolling through, how the Czech FA is trying to reformat really like coach education session design, the environmental design, the pedagogical approach. My mind went to a place of where do you measure the success of this, or how do you maybe measure the success of this, this sort of influence or adoption rate, or how are you trying to do that? Is it a long-term strategy of our FIFA ranking, going back to where we started kind of the conversation? Is it, success at a youth national team? What is that kind of measurable success when this is adopted?
Yeah, brilliant question. But it's really hard to answer this. And I think that there was a similar question in the chat about if you're using qualitative or quantitative measurements. Of course, there's always different approaches. Like if I look at our Czech FA, each one of our sporting departments will measure probably the success slightly differently. For example, the national team department, they will look at what I was showing at the beginning. How many players we develop at the international level, how many players we develop so they can actually go and play a big role in big clubs internationally, which we're lost. We don't have players like Nedved, Poborský, Rosický, and etc. They can learn, from the rankings, and successes on, international stage like Euros, World Cups, and etc. We haven't qualified for World Cup for 20 years, and I really hope we qualify for the next one in Canada so I can go and travel there again. But then if you look at grassroots department, they will measure the success of this. How many players actually staying in the game? How many are actually coming back? How many actually in the long term I'm coming back to the game in a different roles when they're not going to be professional players? Are they going to be coaches within their communities? Are they going to be I don't know, managers, referees, whatever it is? So there's a different aspects how we can measure it. But maybe based on this presentation, of course, now we're looking at the performances of the players within the game environment, and if they actually are solving the game problems and situations more effectively. And you can support it sometimes with the data analysis, but again, be worried that even data within a context can be misleading sometimes. So it's really hard to put just a mark on it, and this is how we measure it. Because it's easy to measure the isolated things, right? Like if I'm going to pass on 3 meters 500 times, there's a big chance that there's a certain amount of passes I will actually execute properly. But how are you going to measure the success of playing 4 against 3? So probably you're going to look at how many times you solve that game situation based on your intention within that situation effectively or not.
Yeah. I love that. And the metric changes depending on the level, the environment, as you say, the department as well within the organization, like that changes. And a great question just came through as well in terms like revolving around unstructured play. You had mentioned that has significantly changed in the Czech environment from that golden generation to maybe a current generation. So, what advice maybe would you give coaches to maybe bring out more unstructured play, to encourage more unstructured play, or how do we try to facilitate that maybe more as adults or caretakers of the game?
Yeah, I think that what Canada actually applied as a skill centers program, it's just brilliant. Just being able to move the players between age groups, play different formats of the game. It's just brilliant because it actually brings back a lot of aspects from the street football or street soccer as well. We don't have that program in place, so we're trying to encourage that in, let's say, the training microcycles, the weekly training every team is having at the level of a child or children, that we encourage them. Make sure that the large space there is actually made for just unstructured play. Try to replicate it. Let the players to decide what format they want to play, how many against how many. Allow them to make all these decisions even for the social interaction purposes, and let them play. Sometimes we even did things in the club that we took the players away from like our official pitch, Because when we were growing up, we didn't play on really nice flat surfaces. Behind our blocks of where we lived, there was like these it was like a field of, with all of the different things on it. So even these kids from, let's say, professional academies, sometimes we took them away to like a parking lot, or we took them to like a real, like, nearby forest, park, and we just let them play there, because now suddenly the ball is bouncing differently. It brings different skills, different actions. It's fun for the kids as well. Of course, it has to be safe, but we really encourage this to be implemented as well. But constraints-led approach and the nonlinear pedagogy principles, if you follow them, you can still structure the game-based exercises, but allow the players to make their own decisions. So that can be, replicated in implicit learning from the unstructured environment. So the players can still create their own solutions. They can still make their own decisions, be creative in the environment. And those are the aspects we need to, multiply pretty much within the environment they're going through in the club.
Do you think that unstructured environment that you talk about, taking the team to a parking lot, to the forest, to a different patch of grass, etc., do you think that the same or very similar kind of outcomes can come from that unstructured environment when there is a coach still present?
Yeah, of course, it is different. Like when there's no adult, involved, it's much different environment than where there is, because you're always gonna, influence the environment somehow. So yeah, definitely. I've been amazed that we have a very nearby club, and they've gone at the level of developing the autonomy of the players so high that they actually allow the players, they meet themselves in their own time when they should have practice. They just meet themselves. They set up where they're going to meet. They take the public transit and they just travel to a certain place which they selected themselves, and they just decide what activity they're going to do, and they just run it themselves, like a real replication of what we did when we were kids. And of course, the society is different. The social culture environment is different. So there's certain things you need to do with the children before to make sure that you secure safety and etc. But they're still trying to do these different interventions, and it's extremely interesting to see.
That's very interesting. And to be honest, I think that's a really interesting environment to probably dive a little deeper in, to see how they've cultivated that level of autonomy and ownership for the players as well. Martin, I know it's late, right? And you've probably got a course to deliver tomorrow as well, and probably some review and prep to do for that. So I'm going to close things down there. And honestly, thank you for not only the time, but able to try and dig into your mind, to what the Czech FA are doing, and really how you continue to push the envelope and try and develop yourself in the game. Unbelievable. So really, really, really appreciate that. And I'm sure, given, how many people stuck around for a very long time today, it was very insightful and very informative. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. I very much enjoyed it. Again, I just completed 10 hours of presenting today, so I hope it was valuable for at least some of you, and you take a little bits of pieces, every one of you with you. That will be our job completed. And I also see that some familiar faces are on the call, so I'm just saying hi to all of the old friends, and hopefully everybody's doing well. And everybody else, I just wish you all the best and good luck in your careers and professional and personal lives.